Hare Krishna everybody, my name is Tirtharaj Das. I'm originally from Australia. I grew up in Sydney where I received my education until 1976, and today the devotees have asked me to give some history of how I became a devotee in the Hare Krishna movement. So my first contact with the Hare Krishna devotees was in the early 70s. On my way to school I remember seeing the devotees would be chanting in Martin Place in Sydney. And they would be there from the morning, from 8 o'clock in the morning till when I left school at 3:30. I would see them 4 o'clock, and I used to remember, even being 12 or 13 years old, how determined and how enthusiastic and happy the devotees actually were from this chanting. So the 70s were an interesting time. The devotees were recording many different tunes, and one of them was the Hare Krishna record, which used to play on the top 40 on the radio. So that was also very attractive. After I left school in 1976, I went to university and studied law for some time. But unfortunately, I found that lifestyle wasn't really something that I wanted to be. And I had the idea that I wanted to find out who I really was. So I had skipped a few classes at school. So when I left school and went to university, I was only just 17. And one day I told my mother that I'm going to go to Europe, I'm going to go to Germany. And my mother kindly accepted that. And I went to Germany, where I met the devotees at a college, and they offered to provide me a place where I could stay with them. So I stayed in the home of a young couple with their 2 young children, and every day the Mataji, her name was Mani Kundala, she would cook prasadam. And although I wasn't a vegetarian at the time, I thought the food was really great. I was really attracted actually by the food. And after some time, other devotees visited, and they showed me the German copy of the Bhagavad Gita. Although I wasn't familiar with Bhagavad Gita per se, I had read the 6-chapter volume of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's Bhagavad Gita many years earlier. My cousin was one of the early practitioners of transcendental meditation, and as a special gift on my birthday, he had initiated me into a secret mantra. So I had tried to chant that, but I would just often fall asleep from chanting that mantra, and it didn't really change my life very much. So when the devotees showed me the Bhagavad Gita, I saw, oh, it's got more than 6 chapters. It's got 18 chapters. So I thought, let me read this book. And despite being in a foreign language, and it made it a little difficult to understand, especially many of the Sanskrit terms like Dhritarashtra and Kurukshetra, they're all very foreign terms to me. I thought that the philosophy that was inside was really worth investigating. So over some time, I understood the benefits of being a vegetarian, besides the fact that the food tasted very nice, and the combination of the philosophy attracted my intelligence. So when in 1979 the devotees said that they would go from Germany to India, I said, can I come along? During this time I'd been visiting the temple for the Sunday feast programs and enjoyed the chanting with the devotees, and I'd started regularly chanting on beads. So after this trip I thought, well, let me see what it's all about. I thought, let me be open to it, because there are so many different cultures in this world. Surely this must also have something that's good for me. So we embarked on our journey, and it was a very eventful experience actually, the summer of 79. We traveled from Germany on the ferry to London, and we visited many different what they call bucket shops, which were basically places where you could buy a cheap ticket to Asia. And after receiving our injections for cholera and yellow fever, we purchased I think it was a $100 ticket maybe 100 pounds at the time, ticket from London to Delhi. I wasn't so experienced, but the other devotees said, oh, it's a good ticket. So we got to the airport and we went on, I remember this journey very well, it was on Ariana Afghan Airlines. And they had an old Boeing 707, and it seemed like the windows were leaking. The seatbelts certainly didn't work. So that was quite an experience. So after a journey, the plane landed in Kabul. And what was supposed to be a 2-hour transit stop turned into a 3 or 4 day nightmare, because the day that we landed was the day that the Russians invaded Afghanistan. So when we were at the airport, we could hear gunfire and we saw tanks, and it was all a big chaos. So we lived for several days in the transit hall until one day they said, okay, the plane's going to take off. So I thought, okay, great, we're going to India. And the plane went up and we flew for a few hours, and then we landed, and I thought, this doesn't look like India. There were modern buildings and skyscrapers, and we actually had landed in Tehran because, as I found out later, it was cheaper for fuel in Tehran. Finally, we arrived in Delhi, and unfortunately my bags didn't arrive. So I basically landed in India with just the clothes on my back and some traveler's checks that I had taken with me. Once I got to India, it was summer, so it was May 79, so it was quite hot. And we decided to go to Haridwar and to Rishikesh and to Uttarkashi. And finally, the devotees said, let's go back to Delhi. And there in Delhi, I met some other devotees who said, we're going to Vrindavan tomorrow. Do you want to come? So I said, sure, I've always wanted to go to Vrindavan. So I remember that trip. We took the, I can't remember the name, Taj Express or something like that. And it stopped in Mathura, and we got off. And there was no taxis in those days. There was just a Tonga. So on the back of a Tonga, I sat with my little bag, and a little horse was pulling us along on the road from Mathura to Vrindavan. And then we went out to Raman Reti, to the Krishna Balaram temple, which at that time was really a long way from town, and it was just this place in the forest. There were Nilgai on forest just outside. There was no shops, and there wasn't really that many devotees out there, especially in the summer. So after some time, the devotees said, why don't you stay here? So I thought, well, it's Krishna's birthplace, it's auspicious, and as it says in the Vedas, when something auspicious comes along, you should do it immediately. So I thought, let me do it, let me become a devotee. And I've, of course, been through many different experiences since that time. And now I look back 36 years later as a Hare Krishna devotee, and I must say that the journey has been remarkable. I've seen many places, I've seen many different people, and I think it's the best decision that I've made in my life. And I encourage everybody who's thinking about Krishna consciousness and who's ever read the philosophy to spend some time to deeply investigate what Krishna consciousness has to offer, because you'll find that beyond the stereotype of eating, sleeping, mating and defending and working every day for a little bit of pleasure, there's a whole other world that you can experience. Devotees have a great time. Although we follow some principles, they're actually very liberating. And the food's great, the association's great, and I hope that all of you can get some inspiration to investigate this seriously yourselves. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.